What's going on, everyone? It's me, Johnny. So today I want to do a breakdown of Rob's upcoming fight against Ikram Aliskerov. Of course, Rob is fighting Ikram at UFC Fight Night in Saudi Arabia this weekend. So I want to break down their fight. I want to give my personal predictions as to who I think is going to win the fight and everything else in between. Now, keep in mind, obvious biases when it comes to my opinions about Rob's fight with Ikram. I'm friends with Rob. We do the podcast together. He's literally on this very channel. So, of course, I'm going to be inherently biased towards him. I can't strip that away completely. I'll try and be as objective as possible, but there's always going to be a little bit of bias in there. But I'm just going to admit that at the beginning of the video so you know I can't not be biased towards Rob. Also, as well, my technical knowledge of the fight game is still very much baseline. I've got a long way to go, I know. So today is going to be a big step for me, doing my very first solo breakdown of a fight. Usually Rob is the technical expert in the room, but I want to try my best and let's see how we go. And finally, some of you have been asking about whether I'm going to be doing video game content on this channel. Well, coincidentally, the review embargo for Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is up now, and I've been playing it. So the second part of this video is me doing a quick review of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. If you want to jump to that, the timestamps are going to be on the screen and also in the description below. But stick around for that if you're interested to know whether Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is good. So let's start off looking at the breakdown from Topology. I like Topology. They break down the stats really nicely. You can see Rob's record on the left there and also Ikram's on the right. Now, interestingly, they say Rob's record is 25-7. I don't know why some places say it's 25-7 and others say it's 26-7. I think the UFC itself and ESPN say it's 26-7. I believe it is 26-7, but other places like Wikipedia have it at 25-7. I have no idea what's going on there, but I'm pretty sure Rob's record is 26-7. Ikram's is 15-1. Coincidentally, his only loss is against Khamzat Chimaev, who was meant to be fighting Rob. So of all people, it had to be Khamzat, right? In terms of the recent record, of course, Rob is coming off a win against Paulo Costa by decision. Ikram hasn't lost since that loss against Khamzat Chimaev. He's won recently in the UFC. He's had 2 proper fights in the UFC, 1 in Dana White's Contender Series. Rob is heading in as the favorite for this fight. I don't think he was the favorite against Khamzat Chimaev. I believe he was the underdog, but now with the fight changing and Ikram still being relatively inexperienced in the UFC, not with fighting in general, but in the UFC, I can absolutely understand why he is not the favorite in this fight. Rob is, of course, he's a previous champion. He's at the top of his game. He's been highly ranked for a long time, so it makes complete sense why Rob is the favorite heading in. But he is only the slight favorite, and I think that's giving a lot of respect to Ikram as opposed to being a slight on Rob, if you know what I mean. Now, Rob is 33, Ikram is 31, so they're pretty close in age. They're obviously going to hit weight. I have no doubt that Rob's going to hit weight. I have no doubt that Ikram's going to hit weight because he was literally meant to fight last weekend. I can't remember. I think it was against Antonio Tricoli. I think that's his name. So he's already ready to fight, and I'm sure he's going to be hitting weight for middleweight. They're both 6 foot, but the big difference here is when it comes to reach. So Ikram's reach is actually 76 inches, whereas Rob's is 73.5 inches. So Ikram has some bloody long arms, all right? And that will absolutely play a factor in this fight, especially when it comes to Ikram's jab. I'm going to be talking about that in this video. So let's start off breaking down Ikram a little bit, because I'm sure like many of you, I hadn't seen too much of Ikram, especially prior to the UFC. And I wanted to, excuse me, I'm still a bit sick. I wanted to rewatch some of his previous fights, especially in the UFC, to see how he's doing recently. So he's coming off of wins against Alves, against Hors, and Souza. As I said, he's 15-1. He has 6 wins by knockout, 5 wins by submission, 4 wins by decision. So he's very much an all-round fighter. This guy can knock people out, he can submit people, he can outlast them and get the decision victory. So he's very much an all-round fighter. He can do everything. He has a sambo wrestling background, but he's a very bloody good striker as well. So he's very dangerous. And I think we do need to give him a lot of respect here because by all measures, right, he might not have the same notoriety as Khamzat, but he's probably just as dangerous, if not more dangerous than Khamzat, because not only does he have the wrestling, he also very much has a good technical striking game. So Rob does need to be careful when it comes to that. As I said, I rewatched a couple of his recent fights. I want to start off with this fight against Souza in Dana White's Contender Series, because this fight was very different to two of his fights in the UFC because he engaged a little bit more in the wrestling background that he has. So when you watch this fight, you can notice that he shoots a little bit more quickly for the takedown in the fight. The first one was snuffed, and then he took a right hand for good measure after that. But he was cleverly using underhooks against Souza while he was blitzing to stifle his blitzing, and he was using more of that wrestling background, as I mentioned. And then the ending of the fight came where he shot in for another underhook. He threw Souza to the ground, and he went right into side control and managed to lock in a Kimura for the submission. So again, that is his wrestling background coming out. He can submit people. It was very, very clean. He got into that Kimura very quickly. Souza had no idea what to do. And from memory, Souza was a much taller fighter than him. So getting a taller fighter down is not that easy to do. It's much harder to do. The ease in which he did that and locked in that Kimura, that submission, was beautiful. So absolutely, that's something that Rob needs to keep an eye on. And I'll be talking about that when I break down Rob specifically. But then I want to talk about two of his more recent fights, again, in the UFC proper, not at Dana White's contender series. So he fought Alves at UFC 294, right? And this was when Alves, mind you, was just debuting in the division at middleweight. So maybe not the most competitive fight for Ikram, but he still gave us some good offense. But Ikram obviously won that fight. The important thing to note here is that Ikram didn't really engage in any wrestling whatsoever. He was very much staying on the feet, using his hands, and he is very bloody good with his hands. He's very good at keeping distance, he's very good at evading, and he's very good at using those front kicks to keep distance as well. He's not the fighter, unlike Khamzat, that's going to blitz in and completely pressure a fighter. He's happy at times just to sit back a little bit, see what the other guy is doing. Again, keep his distance. He especially works the jab, and we're going to be emphasizing that a lot in this video, but he uses the jab, he uses those front kicks. So sometimes he likes to keep his distance, and other times he will go in a little bit more. So he was doing beautiful, good counter left rights as well, while Alves was doing a little bit more of the pressuring in that fight. And he dropped him with a strong left jab out of nowhere. And the important thing is it didn't really telegraph this. I missed it when he first threw that left jab. I was like, what the hell just happened? It was so quick, so clean. It took me off guard. And then he kept the pressure on with a high left kick and then a switch knee, and then he batted in with punches, and that was the end of the fight. But really, it came from that left jab. That is what Rob really needs to be careful of when it comes to his fight with Ikram. Ikram's left jab is really, really scary. And it was very similar again against Phil Hawes at UFC 288. And this was his debut, so the fight before in the UFC. Again, similarly, he was keeping his distance. He fought behind the front left jab and behind his front kick. And that front left jab, as I said, is so bloody scary. He's not going too forward with the pressure. Again, he's happy to sit and wait. Now, there was a moment here, excuse me, because Phil Hawes, I believe he was, he traveled somewhere. I think he traveled to Thailand to study Muay Thai a little bit. So he was pretty good with his hands. He was pretty good with his offense. And he got, Ikram specifically, did get a little bit wobbled, right? After throwing the dangerous left jab that he has. And I want to stress this when it comes to Ikram. I'm noticing a little bit of a vulnerability when he throws that left jab. As good as it is, he does leave himself a little bit open, and I think that's where Rob can take advantage, right? Especially if when he throws that left jab, if he can't evade any counter that comes back, he can take a solid hit to the head, and that's not always good for him. And we saw that in the Khamzat Chimaev loss with him, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this actually happened a couple of times where he either threw the left jab or even fainted with the left jab. He would get clocked, and he needs to be careful. Ikram specifically needs to be careful with that when he goes in with the jab. He can't just leave himself open because Rob is absolutely going to take advantage of that, right? And Phil was also having a lot of success with body kicks. We know Rob likes to throw kicks, more lower kicks recently, especially calf kicks against Paulo Costa, but Phil was having a lot of success with the body kicks in their fight. But once that jab actually started to connect, that's when Hawes was really getting troubled. Absolutely getting troubled. Ikram smelt blood in the water. He did happen to slip on a high kick, if you remember watching that fight, but then he started blitzing Hawes. He was getting into the Thai clinch. He threw a knee, and then he finished with a left jab and a right hook combo. A perfect 1-2. He does like to utilize, he doesn't just throw the jab and that's it. He usually throws the jab and then comes in with the right hook. He got that combo. He knocked Phil Hawes out. It was a really, really good showing, really good debut from Ikram Aliskerov. So that's the main takeaway, I think. One, of course, he has a great wrestling background and that he can engage in the wrestling and he can submit a fighter with relative ease, it seems, right? So that's number one that we need to keep in mind. But number two, again, he's very good on his hands. He can knock out a fighter. He can throw knees. He's very good with his jab. He can knock someone out with his right hook. So those are the two big things that Rob is going to have to be very careful of when it comes to this fight. But now I want to talk about his KO loss against Khamzat Chimaev. This was in Brave CF back in 2019. You can Google it. The knockout and the whole fight is actually on YouTube right now, which is pretty cool to see. This was his first loss after 8 wins, and he hasn't lost again since. And I mentioned this, I alluded to this. Again, when he throws that front left jab, he can leave himself a little bit vulnerable. He did that. He was again, wobbled a tiny little bit in his fight in the UFC. He seems to leave himself a little bit open when he throws that left jab. And this was what caused his loss specifically against Khamzat Chimaev. So he got dropped by Chimaev early on by a jab when he was throwing his own left jab, right? He did manage to recover a little bit. They were engaging a little bit of wrestling and clinching. But then again, what led to the actual fight ending directly was, again, he threw another left jab and he got completely knocked out by Khamzat with a right uppercut, right? I know he's very good with his left jab, and this fight was back in 2019. So it's been several years since then, and he's definitely improved since his fight against Khamzat Chimaev. However, he does have this tendency to leave himself a little bit open when he's throwing that left jab. So if he connects with it, we've seen he can literally knock people out and wobble them and sit them on their ass with that left jab. But if he doesn't land it clean and they manage to counter with whatever strike, a kick, a punch, whatever it might be, he can get knocked out. He's had the ability to get knocked out like with every fighter, and Khamzat knocked him out cold. Watch that bloody knockout, man. Watch that fight. His eyes rolled in the back of his head and his arms were up. He was completely gone after that knockout. It was a beautiful knockout from Khamzat Chimaev. And that's exactly what Rob needs to take advantage of when it comes to fighting Ikram Aliskerov. So now let's switch gears to talking about Rob a little bit. Rob, of course, is coming off the decision win against Paulo Costa at UFC 298. I believe that was the one where Alexander Volkanovski lost against Topuria. So in this fight, Rob obviously won it, right? He threw a lot of nice low calf kicks. You listen to Joe Rogan froths every time someone throws a low leg kick, but he was throwing that low leg kick, that calf kick, all night, all bloody night, which slowly but surely troubled Costa throughout the fight. And it really slowed him down as, we got into the end of the second round and also in the third round. Those low calf kicks were really crucial to Rob's game and him getting the victory in the end, right? And he was so bloody good at evading with his head and coming in with the right hook and obviously doing his signature blitz, right? Especially coming in with the jab. His head movement in this fight was so beautiful. And I think he really tried to improve it, especially after the Dricus fight. And we will talk about that Dricus fight up next. But he managed to close distance very, very beautifully. And he repeatedly did that throughout the fight. Now, in terms of some of his weaknesses and downsides in the fight, he obviously, especially in that first round, had a huge issue with how quick Paulo Costa's bloody high head kicks were. They come out of nowhere. They're not telegraphed whatsoever. And he got seriously wobbled when Paulo Costa pulled out that spinning back heel kick. It almost knocked Rob out. And my heart went like into my stomach, man. I thought that was going to be a time where Rob was going to be knocked out. However, it happened late in the first round, thankfully, and he really recovered nicely, especially in the second. But we do need to keep in mind when I'm not going to say this is a general statement for Rob. He needs to be careful about high kicks. Every fighter needs to be, right? But I think when there are potentially kicks that aren't telegraphed and they're very fast and they come out of nowhere, that could catch Rob off guard. And now he knows that. And if you even look in the third round of the Paulo Costa fight, and I think in the second or maybe the third, but he started to watch Paulo Costa when he was doing those spinning heel kicks, and he managed to evade him, and he managed to defend himself when Paulo Costa was throwing those high kicks. So he learned very quickly in that fight, as you should. So I don't think it's going to be causing him too many issues in the fight with Ikram, because Ikram can throw high kicks. He can throw kicks, especially body kicks. But it's just something that, of course, he's going to have to keep in mind. Also as well, Costa's jabs were giving Rob a little bit of trouble as the fight went on, and Ikram has a very good jab, so again, something else that he needs to keep an eye on. Now, there were two very distinct moments that I want to highlight in the second round, right? Where Paulo Costa threw pretty lazy left jabs, and in response, Rob ducked, threw a right hook, and then followed up with the left straight. And I call this out because, again, if Ikram Aliskerov does something similar, trying to go in with his left jab and it doesn't connect, or is lazy, or it misses, or whatever it might be, that's where Rob can absolutely take advantage. We exactly saw it in the Khamzat Chimaev loss, right? Rob can duck and come in with the right hook and the left jab, or he can do it another way around. He literally did that as well against Paulo Costa. Again, Paulo threw the left jab and Rob ducked, and instead of throwing the right hook first, he came in with the left jab and then went over with the right hook. So that's something that Rob is absolutely going to keep an eye on, especially given, Ikram's only loss, and given some of his fights where, again, he left himself a little bit open and vulnerable after throwing that left jab. So Rob's blitzes, I think, are going to be, they're going to be shining in those moments specifically. But now we do need to talk about Rob's fight against Dricus, because it's his most recent loss at UFC 290. Now, in round one, right, Dricus did manage to take Rob down with a leg sweep. And I call this out because, of course, Ikram has a wrestling background, a sambo background. He might try and do something very, very similar with Rob. He might try and take him down. He might try and go with a submission. And in that fight against Dricus, after he was taken down, Rob received some nasty, nasty bloody elbows from Dricus. And obviously, Ikram has the ability to do that. So this is something that Rob is going to have to be very, very careful of. Ikram would absolutely be a better wrestler against than Dricus, right? So Rob does need to be careful about that. His takedown defense needs to be on point. But obviously, this fight camp has all been about wrestling for him, because he was literally training to fight Khamzat Chimaev. And Khamzat Chimaev is much more of a wrestler, especially an aggressive wrestler, than Ikram Aliskerov is, right? We know how Khamzat likes to fight, especially in the opening round. He would have absolutely gone out Rob with a lot of wrestling, trying to take him down. That is entirely what Rob was training for. Every time I talk to him, bloody wrestling, man. I'm sore from wrestling, this and that. He was training so much wrestling in this fight camp to prepare for Khamzat Chimaev. So because of that, he's ready for wrestling. He's absolutely ready for wrestling. And even though he was taken down by Dricus du Plessis, I need to remind you that Rob's takedown defense is still 82%. It's like over 80%. Rob's takedown defense is very, very good, okay? And especially now after such a huge fight camp, a training camp, where he's been training a lot of wrestling to prepare for someone like Khamzat Chimaev, his takedown defense, in my opinion, is going to be on point. This is why I think the fight is more going to be on the feet, either because Ikram's not going to bother with a lot of the takedowns, or he's going to try and Rob's going to snuff those takedowns, and they're going to have to stay on the feet. And I think that's where most of the fight is going to lay on the feet. I could be wrong on that. Ikram could be very, very good. He might see a weakness in Rob's takedown defense. He might try and take them down again and cinch in a submission. But I just don't see that happening in the fight, to be honest. I think Rob is too prepared for that. I think he knows that, Ikram has a sambo wrestling background. So I think Rob's going to prepare for the takedowns. He's going to stuff most of them. And I think this fight is going to stay on its feet. Now, in the second round of that Dricus fight, I think what was happening here, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Dricus is obviously a very, very awkward fighter. Like, some people say, oh, he's not a good fighter. He looks really strange and awkward when he moves, but that's what makes him so bloody effective, right? Clearly he's effective. He's a bloody middleweight champion of the world. And I think what was disorienting Rob even more is not just his awkward style, but he kept switching stances. He kept going from orthodox to southpaw in that second round especially. And I think that might have troubled Rob a little bit. I think it might have been disorientating him, especially after being taken down and receiving those elbows in the first. He was probably a little bit out of it. But he kept switching stances. I think that disoriented Rob. So I think what happened when we got to the ending sequence is that he was in orthodox, and then Dricus swapped to southpaw, and then he threw a really strong lead right hook, right? So that was when he was in southpaw. So at that stage, his right hand was actually the leading jab, and that's when he went in, and he dropped Rob. Dricus smelt blood, and that's what led to the end of the fight. So Rob does need to be careful. He really does need to be careful when it comes to fighting Ikram, especially Ikram's front left jab. If Ikram connects, we've seen him knock people with it. I think it can really trouble Rob. But I will say, Rob's chin is not gone. I know there's this sentiment that Rob's chin is gone. He took a spinning back heel kick from Paulo Costa that would have knocked out anybody in the bloody world. And he recovered from that, and he won the fight. He won the second round, and he won the third round. And even on top of that, he took a lot of strong punches. He took a lot of strong jabs from Paulo Costa. That's why Rob's face was bloodied a little bit in that fight. So Rob's chin is not gone, but he still has to be careful because Ikram does have knockout power. So what is my overall prediction when it comes to this fight? And I apologize, I keep looking at my notes, but I'm relying on them a little bit to get through this video. Hopefully I'll be doing a decent job. Now, as I mentioned, Rob has been doing a lot of wrestling training, a lot of wrestling prep to deal with Khamzat Chimaev, all right? And I think that's going to come in handy for sure when he fights Ikram. If Ikram does actually decide to utilize the wrestling, I don't know if he does. I don't know if he tries to bother with the wrestling, especially early on. Maybe because it's the 5-round fight. Maybe once he and Rob gets a little bit tired, he might see Rob being a little bit weak and he thinks he can take him down and go for a submission or just keep him on the ground and do some ground and pound. Maybe as we go on later into the fight, he decides to take him down. But I don't know if that's going to be happening, especially as they get sweaty and it's harder to grapple, it's harder to wrestle and pin Rob down. I just don't know how much of a factor it's going to come into this fight, right? Especially because, again, Rob's takedown defense is very, very good. I have it written here. It is 82% bloody takedown defense. It's very, very high. And as we know, Ikram's wrestling is not as aggressive as Khamzat Chimaev. So Khamzat Chimaev would have had way more of a chance to take Rob down when it comes to wrestling. Ikram, I'm not too sure about that. So again, I think this fight is going to be decided on the feet. And we saw, like with Rob's fight against Paulo Costa, his head movement absolutely improved versus his head movement and his evasiveness when he fought Dricus du Plessis. He needs to be very sharp when it comes to his evasiveness against Ikram. He cannot get caught. In particular, he needs to be careful of Ikram's left jab. And if he manages to catch Rob with that left jab, similar to how Dricus caught Rob, then that could be the start of the end of the fight. He needs to be careful because he absolutely has knockout power. But ultimately, my final prediction, I do believe Rob gets the job done. I'm backing Rob to win this fight for several reasons. Again, even though he lost against Dricus, even though he got caught by Dricus with that right hand, I still think he showed that against Costa. He's really improved on moving his head movement, his evasiveness. He's always good against that. Rob's a fantastic striker. He's fantastic with his hands. He's really good with his combos, and he's really good at moving his head back, left, right. He's so bloody quick. He dodges punches that I can't even see be thrown, right? So he's very good at that. He's always been good at that. But he's going to have to be so on point in this fight against Ikram, all right? But I think he can do that. And I think if he can keep the timing with his blitzes on point, and I think if he can deal with Ikram's jab, then I think he can piece up Ikram. I think if he can especially do what he did against Costa, when a jab is thrown, duck, front left punch, going with the right hook or the other way around, and then keep going in with those blitzes, making sure he's defending himself when he does so. If he does that, and if he also continually throws low leg kicks, calf kicks, to slow Ikram down as the fight goes on, I think that's why Rob is going to win this fight. And the biggest factor that we need to mention here is that Ikram has never fought 5 rounds before. Never. Not in his life. Not before the UFC and not in the UFC. Obviously, he's training for that now. And I don't know if he was fighting 3 rounds before, whether he spars way more rounds than that consistently. Of course, they spar more rounds than that, whether they're fighting 3 or 5 rounds. But now that he knows he's fighting a 5-round fight, he's definitely going to be trying to prepare for that, prepare his cardio. But he's never fought 5 rounds before. And his last recent fights ended very quickly. Rob is very comfortable in that territory. As we know, he's had 5-round fights in the UFC. A lot of experience there, and because of that, his cardio is going to last him. I think Rob is going to take him, to the end. I think it's going to go the distance. I'm going to tip Rob winning this fight by decision. That is my official tip. That's my prediction. Let me know what you thought of my breakdown of Rob's fight against Ikram Aliskerov. I was babbling a little bit there. I was a little bit, stuttery here and there, but I think I did okay. Let me know what you think. But as I promised, now I want to talk about Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. So Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is the latest expansion, or the biggest expansion for Elden Ring, and it's From Software's largest expansion to date, right? So this is their biggest one ever. And as I said, I've been playing it for a good week or so now, 7-8 days by the time I actually got to sit down and play it. And this review, this, impressions, whatever you want to call this, is not going to have any major spoilers whatsoever. All I'm going to talk about is some story elements that they've already mentioned publicly. So if you watched the trailer or read their website about Shadow of the Erdtree, you're not going to get spoiled by anything in this video. I promise you, this is something that you need to experience for yourself. But I'll still give a slight warning. If you don't want to know anything whatsoever, slight spoiler warning for this video. So we do have a new story in Shadow of the Erdtree, and I pretty much got this from their website, so I'm just going to repeat it verbatim pretty much. But guided by the Empyrean Miquella, so Miquella is a big part of this expansion, players are beckoned to the Land of Shadow. It's also called the Realm of Shadow. I think on the map it's called the Realm of Shadow too, which is obscured by the Erdtree. The land was ravaged by war and set ablaze by the flame of Messmer. Miquella departed to this land, divesting himself of his flesh and strength, and he's awaiting the return of his promised lord. So you'll go there, you're going to be discovering many secrets of this world, what went on, especially with the war, as I mentioned, with Messmer. You're going to meet others who also are following in Miquella's footsteps, and they might have some ulterior motives. Again, this is all on their website, so it's not spoiler territory. This is what they're saying. And the story is very much told in the typical Elden Ring way. So if you like the base game, if you like how the story was told in the base game, you have to read a lot of item descriptions. That's where most of the lore comes out. Everything else, if you are barely talking to NPCs, if you're barely reading items, the story is very, very top level. You get a brief idea sometimes of what's really going on. So if you really want to understand what's going on, you need to talk to a lot of characters, talk to a lot of NPCs, explore as much as you can, read as many item descriptions as you can. Whenever you pick up a new weapon or a talisman, read everything, and that's how you're going to get the full experience when it comes to the story in Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. I really like the story, all right? I love Elden Ring lore. I listen to Buddy Vidya and everybody's bloody lore videos in Elden Ring, especially heading into Shadow of the Erdtree. I want to know what's going on. I wanted to know why Miquella was going to the Realm of Shadow. I wanted to know what Messmer was doing and all that kind of stuff. We've seen footage of Messmer already, and I can't show that in this video specifically, but I wanted to know what was going on, and let's just say I really enjoyed it. I really bloody enjoyed the story. Again, you are encouraged to read everything, just let everything soak in, take everything in, but it's a very fun, enjoyable story, and it just further develops the lore of Elden Ring, which is already so bloody good, and more of that is even better. So let's talk a little bit more about the setting and some of the exploration in Shadow of the Erdtree. So the Realm of Shadow is completely separate to the lands between, right? So you can actually fast travel between those two places at will. It's not like other areas, like Mogwin's Palace, for instance, that area in the base game where you can quickly, like you got the top view of the lands between, and then you can swap to some dungeons and some underground areas like Mogwin's Palace. I say underground areas, pretty much they are. So it's not quite like that. You pretty much swap to an entirely different map for Shadow of the Erdtree, for the Realm of Shadow, and you can fast travel in between them at will. Whenever you want, you can fast travel to the Sites of Grace. And the only way to get there are some prerequisites. You need to kill Radahn, you need to kill Mohg. And then once you travel to the Realm of Shadow from Mogwin's Palace, that's where everything begins, that's where everything kicks off. You can go back and forth as you please. So that was really, really nice. I also said this in my impressions video because I previously played it for 3 hours as part of an early play session for my Lone Vault Wanderer channel. But I said this, the world is gorgeous. It looks beautiful. It's beautiful to explore. In particular, the use of lighting, the use of color, the level design is phenomenal. You'll have so much to bloody explore, so much to see, so much to do. And in typical From Software fashion, when it comes to at least Elden Ring, the world has this tendency just to keep branching out. You get to one point and you think you go into one area and there's an entirely different area they can go off and explore if you want to. It just keeps branching out like a tree. There's always a new pathway. There's always something more to see. There's always another legacy dungeon. There's always something new to fight. There's always more items to get. And I absolutely, because I played it as much as I could, I absolutely did not get through everything. Absolutely not. There's so much to bloody do. I think they said this is specifically 30 to 40 hours if you want to do everything. I think that's about right. I wasn't able to put that many hours into it yet, so I still have a lot to do, but rest assured, you're going to have a lot to do when it comes to playing Shadow of the Erdtree. In terms of performance and bugs, no issues whatsoever. I'm playing on PS5, I was playing on PS5, not a single bug, not a single issue with frame rate or crashes or anything like that. Everything was buttery smooth and it was bloody fantastic, right? It was kind of crazy. I forgot to think about bugs and performance when I was writing this review. And at the end, I was reminded like, oh, usually when I do a review, I have to talk about bugs and issues that I experience. Not one, not a single issue. So it was beautiful work by From Software. In terms of new items, Shadow of the Erdtree adds a lot of new weapons, equipment, talismans, ashes of war, weapon skills, and magic. And those, of course, they're new, so they're not found in the base game. There's a lot to experiment with, a lot of new items to pick up, a lot of cool new items as well, especially the martial arts style that you'll be able to trial out. That's a lot of fun. But I will be honest, I wasn't experimenting too much with the new stuff because I want to see how, let's call it the meta. I want to see how the meta settles. I want to see what items are really good because I didn't want to keep wasting my level tiers. I didn't want to keep wasting my precious resources in leveling up too many weapons only for them to turn out to be crap, right? So I was mostly going through this playthrough, mostly sticking with my build because I'd fine-tuned it to the nth degree. I was really comfortable with my build. That's the build that I wanted to use to fight a lot of the bosses. So I didn't experiment too much with the weapons, but where I did, they are a lot of fun. There's a lot of new stuff in there, especially in my, again, the early playthrough that I did, the 3-hour playthrough. I experimented with more stuff there. So there's a lot of new weapons. I think you're going to be enjoying that. It's definitely one of the it's one of the highlights, one of the best features of this expansion. But let's talk about combat. As you would expect, lots of new enemies, lots of bosses. The boss battles and the boss encounters are expectedly great. They're absolutely great. Lots of variety in level design, lots of variety in character design. Their move sets are very diverse, great to try and combat and to fight against. The timing is sometimes frustrating, but it's very, very typical of Elden Ring in any Souls game. The boss battles were a lot of fun. They absolutely challenged me, and like a typical Elden Ring, like a typical Souls game, all you want to do is get better. Keep learning the movesets, keep learning what makes these bosses tick, and just come back again and again and again and freaking kill them. Sometimes I just want to sit there and do nothing else but kill a bloody boss before bed, right? I'm like, all right, tonight I'm going to kill this boss, and tonight I'm going to kill that boss. So much fun as you would expect. And these bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree are absolutely great. New enemies, lots of new enemies as well. They're cool too. Some of them can really kick your ass. Like in terms of combat difficulty of some of these enemies, they were like destroying me, especially in some of the latter stages of the expansion, wrecking me. You do need to be careful. And this brings me to a discussion about the overall difficulty of Shadow of the Erdtree of this expansion. You're not just going to be able to walk through this thing, even if you think you are with your overpowered bloody build and you've leveled up and your vigor is very high, your HP is high, your endurance is very high, your stamina is very high. Even if you think you have the best build out there, you're going to die. You're going to die and you're going to get killed and you're going to have to learn and get better. Don't expect this to be a walk in the park. This is especially because of the Erdtree system. So as you go through Shadow of the Erdtree, you pick up these items called Erdtree fragments. And as you pick these things up, essentially, you can empower yourself with them at sites of grace, and that makes you a little bit stronger in specifically the Realm of Shadow. It doesn't apply in the base game, but as you keep finding these fragments and you keep empowering yourself, you get stronger. You can dish out a little bit more damage, and you can take more damage specifically in the Realm of Shadow. So that's how this expansion kind of scales you a little bit to ensure that early on, you're not just able to completely kill enemies. As you explore, you'll find more of these fragments, and you can only get some of those fragments towards the end of the expansion, right? So that's how it kind of keeps you like in check and makes sure you're not too powerful, even if your build is a crazy, ridiculous level. There are obviously some bosses that you're going to be able to kill pretty easily because your build is optimized and your levels are really high. But I think for the most part, this is a pretty difficult expansion. It's difficult in the sense it's Elden Ring difficult. I think it's on par with the end game, the regular end game, the later stages of the base game of Elden Ring. So that's to be expected, and it's a good thing, right? It definitely challenged me, especially some of these boss battles. One boss battle in particular, kicking my ass, man. Absolutely kicking my ass. In terms of questing, the main quest is good. I won't spoil that for you. The one thing that I want to say here as well is that you really don't need a guide. I think Miyazaki came out and talked about this, about how he understands why people want to use a guide, and he's never going to slight anyone for wanting to use a guide for their games, right? Sometimes people just like to use guides. I just like to use guides. But he also said as well that he doesn't want guides to be a necessity. He said, if people play our games, Shadow of the Erdtree, Elden Ring, whatever, the base game, if people play our games and they can't progress physically without the use of a guide, then we have done something wrong. And I think that mentality has really shone through in Shadow of the Erdtree, because sometimes in the base game, there are some bits, especially with the medallions and finding the bloody lifts, sometimes you had to do a bit of experimenting, a lot of exploring, a lot of reading to figure out what the hell was going on. And a guide, for some people I can understand, might have been necessary. Maybe not in your opinion, but for some people I can understand if necessary, or if that was necessary. It can get a little bit difficult at times. However, with Shadow of the Erdtree, I had no issues whatsoever. No issues whatsoever. I didn't have to screw around or figure out what the hell was going on. I was pretty much able to go from point A to point B to point C to point D and go right to the end of the expansion without any issues, right? The game did that beautifully. I did not need a guide. I never felt like I needed a guide. I was able to get right to the end quite easily, at least for the main bits, the main quest, let's call it. When it comes to the side questing with characters, where there is a kind of, let's call it a side quest, a series of quests with the characters that have also embarked towards the Land of Shadow. That's a little bit different. That I feel like I've definitely stuffed up a little bit. That I feel like I didn't have the right conversations at the right time. I didn't find the right people. So I reckon I've stuffed that up a little bit, and I might need to replay the expansion to get the full experience and ensure that those quests were properly done and I got all the rewards, right? So I think some people are going to benefit from a guide with that, but also I think that's how they intended it. At least with the main stuff, you're going to be fine without a guide. With the side stuff, if you want to try and get everything and get the full experience, I think a guide's going to be very helpful in that regard. And I know that I stuffed something up. But also keep in mind, I was kind of rushing to try and play this thing to be able to review it in time, right? So because I was rushing and not playing it like I normally would, I didn't take my time. I didn't take my time like I normally would and make sure I explored everything and read everything and spoke to every bloody character. If I did that, I think it would have been much easier in that regard. So that's definitely a part of an issue. Anytime you review a game, that's always what happens. You feel like you're in a rush to get the bloody thing done, right? So I think if I played it normally, like you will be doing, I assume, I think you're going to be fine with the questing. I think you're going to be fine talking with the characters and all that kind of stuff. So overall, this is more Elden Ring. Shadow of the Erdtree is more Elden Ring, and that is good. But please take your time. Do not rush it like I did. The one criticism that I think people might have with Shadow of the Erdtree is if you beeline just the main quest stuff, the main story, it can feel pretty short. Because I tried to do that, I had to finish it to be able to say I finished it, I played it so I can review it for this channel. Like I had to try and finish it in time. So because of that, I felt like I was rushing through the main bit. And then at times I was like, oh, this does feel a little bit short, but that was on me. I knew that's why it was short, because I was needing to rush it to get to the end. But if you're taking your time, if you're making sure you're doing all the other quests properly and you're reading everything properly and you're letting everything, soak in, you're exploring properly, it's not going to feel that quick, right? The pacing is going to be much better for you. But I do see some people just completely beelining the main quest and feeling like it's short. So if that is what you were thinking of doing, don't, because you're going to ruin it for yourself. That is the one main criticism that I think people are going to have. Not that I have it, again, for the reasons that I mentioned, but I think that might be one of the main criticisms that people have. So those are my thoughts. That was my review and my impressions of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Let me know if you enjoyed this video in the comments below. And until next time, this has been Johnny. Please take care of yourselves. And until the next video, I'll see you. I was about to do my regular outro for my gaming channel. I'll see you in the next video. Keep fighting the good fight.